Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is Alabama writer Rick Bragg, the author of the family sagas All Over But the Shoutin', Ava's Man, and The Prince of Frogtown. Bragg's new book is The Best Cook in the World, a collection of recipes from his mother's kitchen and the stories that go with them. I spoke with Rick Bragg in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Rick, good to have you back in again.
No, my pleasure.
You have a book in between since our last conversation. The Southern Journey popped up, and we never really did talk about it, but we had spoken of it with your previous book. So we just keep rolling on. You seem to be perhaps coming to the end of the Bragg family saga. Do you anticipate that The Best Cook in the World is the final volume in that sequence?
That will depend on whether or not we do something really stupid. As long as we more or less stay out of, jail, I think, I think the book on Mom and her cooking, the food memoir is probably. But I say that, and then something will happen. And Southern writers all got to do a cookbook at some point, and then they have to do a dog book. And I got a dog book out there in the stratosphere somewhere, I think.
I don't doubt it for a second. I urge you, though, when you do the dog book, and I know your mother takes in stray dogs, and apparently you have now as well, stop there.
Okay.
I'm not the judge of this, although I'm judgmental. I'm not the judge of this. I can stand a dog book, but you must stop then, no matter how many cats there are at the Bragg house.
No
cat book.
No, there'll never be a cat book. Me and cats, and if you want to lose half your readership, because for some reason reading and cats go together, book lovers. Oh yeah, book lovers and cat lovers are the same. And so you better not say anything cruel about cats. But cats and I have never coexisted happily or peacefully. It had something to do with cat hair in every sandwich I ever ate. But but I like them fine.
Willie Morris rounded out his career finally. He went from his dog book to his
and I love Willie, but I don't think I got a cat book in me.
No. This book, it's your longest book, which, it really is. The publisher says it's 562 or something like that.
Pretty long.
It's pretty long. For you, it's longer, 100 pages longer than usual.
I always thought that a good book ought to be about the same thickness as a good steak. It ought to be about like that. And so 350 pages is a book you pick up in the bookstore and you say, well, this is worth it,
Must have taken a while, though.
Well, it took so long. I got confused, which won't surprise anybody, but I got a little confused about where I was in the book. And I trusted technology, and on my page count on my little laptop, it kept telling me, 200, 300, 350. Well, it lied, and I thought I was being quite economical, and instead it turned out a little longer. But what do they say? It's a fast read.
The size is not a problem. Mainly, well, first of all, there are the stories, which are independent mostly of one another, and then there are the recipes, which are independent, and people can't object to getting more recipes and more stories. They're not. The first thing, reading along in the early pages, the thing that really tickled me was that your mother, of course, and her generation of country cooks didn't have cookbooks. And they didn't have much written down. And I was very amused by the stabs and the smidgens, and especially that one part where where she said, well, then you put in some.
Yeah, hun, just some.
Some.
Yeah.
And you had to make that into teaspoons and
Yeah.
cups.
Well, let's say I attempted to turn it into teaspoons and cups. A lot of very serious cooks who heard that we were doing this, and it is a narrative about where our food comes from. It goes back to the turn of the last century, if not before, because a lot of our recipes go back to, the Civil War and before. There's a porridge, kind of a cornmeal porridge that goes back even further than that. Mm-hmm. But, it is a narrative about where that food came from. It all started because my grandfather married my grandmother, and she could not cook a lick.
Now, she's Ava.
Ava.
And her young husband is
Charlie.
the man we will know as Ava's man.
Right, Charlie. And
You know something about them already.
oh yeah, and they, she couldn't cook. So, and she could get a little mean, and she was tough, and she was strong-willed, and everyone that he brought in to try to teach her to cook, she threatened their life and ran them off. And that's just the kind of person she was. And finally, he thought, well, who do I know that's mean enough, smart enough, and a good enough cook to teach her to cook? And his daddy, my great-grandfather, had fled to the foothills of not the foothills, but the deep mountains in Georgia. He had been involved in a killing, and he ran away and was in hiding. And my grandfather got on a gray mule, rode into those mountains, rode up to his daddy and said, "Daddy, I've married a beautiful woman who cannot cook, and I am starving to death." And the old man, who was not a kind, warm, and fuzzy man on the surface, came down the mountain and escaped whatever justice or what passed for justice back then, and taught my grandma how to cook.
One dish at a time.
One dish at a ornery time. And she got so mad at him early on that I love this story. She kind of walked around looking for a well to push him down. She was looking for an old abandoned well, and she was going to get him close and push him in. But she never did it, but she did think about it. And but these wonderful recipes for pinto beans and ham, baked chicken and turnips, all these, great Southern recipes, crackling cornbread.
A lot of these recipes are for what appear to be simple dishes. Mm-hmm. A pot of beans,
right.
A fried egg,
right.
Cornbread or cornbread muffins.
Right.
But apparently there's a lot more to it in order to get it right. I found one of the ingredients to be time. Mm. An awful lot of the recipes in your book, you very quietly, almost parenthetically suggest simmer for 3 hours.
Right.
That's one of the tricks in the book, isn't it?
Right. And, I think people, would substitute, they'd immediately in their mind, they would do the arithmetic and say, okay, crock pot. They wouldn't stand over a pot for that amount of time. But yeah, it's not all of them, but most of them are time intensive. They're a lot of iron skillet cooking, a lot of pot cooking on top of the stove. My mother was not a dessert person, but chocolate pies and coconut pie and that kind of thing. Pecan pie should be illegal. And then there are the more exotic things. There is a possum recipe.
The funniest thing about the possum recipe is the getting of possum. Mm. Mm. If you go hunting, that's fun. But at one time you had a cow in a ditch, a dead cow.
Well, no, my grandfather, my great grandfather, Jimmy Jim, had. There is some legal disagreement as to exactly how he came upon the cow. He was hired to go find the cow, and the problem is some people said that he might have been seen leading the cow to the railroad trestle where it might have accidentally fallen to its death.
Cows can be
You
clumsy.
never know. That's just the way a cow will do you.
Well, a cow will attract a possum.
Right. It will. A lot of them. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
I want to talk more about individual recipes, but there's one thing in the book that comes up from time to time. And your mother is explicit on this, emphatic, that food in diners and I guess normal restaurants, not high-end restaurants, isn't as good as it used to be.
Well, I think that you hate to paint with such a broad brush because there are restaurants within 15 minutes of us, 10 minutes of us right here that are great meat and threes. They're very good ones here in town. You and I have been to some here in town. I distinctly remember a very good fried chicken and pig feet combination that was just delicious, but maybe not the healthiest. I think it had macaroni and cheese on the side,
Right. Okay.
but
balance.
and collards. We had a green. We had collards, but her ideas about restaurant food.
A hamburger.
Yeah, well, a hamburger, and I know this is terrible, but to me, fast food, what we think of as fast food, we used to love a hamburger out of a sack.
Yeah.
We used to just love it. It was just such a treat. Well, that's disappeared. But there are still very good places to get a burger out of a sack, like in my hometown. But mostly, for the most part, those places are gone. They're just gone. And the mom and pop, I hate that cliche, but the mom and pop meat and three, the good hole-in-the-wall barbecue stand. Now, it's all about rustic and style, and Southern has become a fashion or a marketing tool. You can go to buffets and there's a great buffet down in Fairhope, a meat and three. There are some good ones around Northeast Alabama where I'm from. But for the most part, those places are gone. And the ones that remain tend to be, that day glow macaroni and cheese that you could see from space and turnip greens out of a can, beans out of a can.
It's cost efficient.
It's cost efficient, and I believe that Southerners in particular, but I think a lot of other people, maybe Midwesterners, the Northeasterners up high in the frozen tundra, Southwesterners, I think they are still starved for that kind of food. They still, I love Indian food. I love curry. I love Chinese. I love good Italian. But I am hungry for good Southern cooking. And when you're on the road,
well, you're not going to get it on the road much.
You're not going to get it as much. So what you do is you settle. You tend not you try to ignore the fact that the coleslaw probably went bad on back of a truck somewhere up Highway, 21. You ignore the fact that the mashed potatoes, it's been a long, long process since they were actually a potato.
In the summertime, now in the wintertime, if the vegetables and the fruits come from Peru, we have to expect they've traveled hard. But I giggled during the time that you and your mom were talking about tomatoes. Now, Sand Mountain grows tomatoes, but I think you're in agreement that the tomatoes aren't as good as they used to be. Why are tomatoes that are still, or sweet potatoes or whatever, that are raised in Alabama under the same sun in the same dirt, why are they not as good? Is that nostalgia or is it real?
No, it's the growing season. We've come to expect tomatoes all the time, and it's cold up there on Sand Mountain a big part of the year. So a lot of our tomatoes, restaurant tomatoes in particular, and grocery store tomatoes come from Homestead, Florida, or points much further south. And they grow really good tomatoes if you're eating them in Homestead. But those those pink things that we get in most grocery stores are just an abomination. You know, they're not very much a tomato. And, you know, I know that realistically you can't make a great tomato materialize out of the air, but you know, even in the dead of summer, we'll settle for a pink tomato instead of a really good one.
I like the farmers markets that I know.
The back of a truck.
It's as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, some of this food, just in 2 seconds, we should say, a lot of the flavor in this food comes from
Salt,
lard,
right,
bacon,
right,
bacon grease, sugar.
right.
So this is not health food, not by a long stretch.
No.
But so what?
No, I think the so what is how we've been living with this for a long time.
Yeah.
But for instance, pork. In the southern cliche of the way Southerners eat pork is you see a whole hog spinning on a spit, or you see big racks of ribs, or you see big pork roasts. Whereas in blue collar cooking, pork was mostly a seasoning. It was you know, a cube of fatback used to season beans because pork was dear. I mean, it was expensive. Even if you raised your own, it was dear. So, you know, that said, our recipe for pinto beans and ham is swimming in. If you have the money to eat it any way you want to.
Yeah.
Our recipe for pinto beans and ham is probably a ratio of about 55% beans and that wonderful nectar, you know, from the soup, and a whole lot of lean ham, fat ham, ham skin. You know, the bone itself brings a flavor to it. And you know, people buy a little ham hock at the grocery store and they'll throw it in a pot of beans and they'll think that's as good as life gets. No, I mean, when it all cooks together and you get that elixir of the ham fat and the soup from the pinto beans just kind of pooling on top, that's a reason to live.
And it's beans.
It's beans, just beans.
There is something that popped through my head while I was reading some of the recipes, is that there is, and you're going to find this peculiar maybe, but there is a bizarre parallel between authentic Southern cooking with its minimum of meat and Chinese cooking with its minimum of meat. Now the Chinese is likely to be stir-fried and cooked very quickly, and the Southern is likely to be simmered or
Really
baked
simmered,
for hours and hours.
Right.
But the ratios are the same. That is, the meat is in there for flavor, and it's in there in small quantities because meat is expensive and vegetables mostly aren't.
Right.
So Chinese and Piedmont cooking.
Well, you know, the beautiful thing about Southern cooking is if you get a vegetable plate, say my mother, you walk in and you say, got anything to eat? And she'll say, just got some vegetables on the stove. Well, it'll be pinto beans cooked with ham. It will be wonderful collards that are not cooked to mush, but are that great kind of dense, almost waxy texture that you call it having. There'll be a little bit of hog gel maybe melting on there somewhere. You know, fried squash cooked with onions and butter. You know, it's a vegetable, but by the time you add a piece of cornbread with that, it's a meal then. It's a meal, and it's more than that. It's something that I could probably eat. Might not live very long, but I could eat it every day.
Oh, well, people did when they could.
Absolutely.
Speaking of not living very long,
Do you know something? Have you been talking to my doctor?
It reminds me of the chapter on poke salad. Now, Southerners, when I was a brand new Southerner, or new to the South, people would speak of it, and I'd say, "What is it?" Because
well, you've changed a lot since.
Well, yes, yeah, I haven't eaten that, but I have changed in other ways.
Right.
But the impression that I got from these people was that they were like dandelions.
Yeah.
And you walked along the ditch and you gathered them up, you took them home and you washed them and you put vinegar on them and you ate them. And reading your chapter, apparently that will kill you.
Yeah, you could eat it like salad if you want to die, but you should not. It's the way that they're prepared is you pick them. And look, the berries are toxic, will kill you dead.
And the root?
Especially a child or someone older or weak.
Yeah.
It'll kill. The taproot and the root and anything really up the stalk is poisonous. The leaves themselves, the leaves that people eat are poisonous. So no one should go out and pick them some poke salad and go home and cook it without knowing the rigorous process. And what you do is you pick it. Even picking it can give you a rash, like a poison ivy rash. But you strip the leaves off. You take just the leaves. Don't eat any of the stalk. Just the leaves, and you wash them, rinse them, pour out the water, rinse them again. Pour out the water, rinse them again. So you've rinsed them 3 times. Then you can boil them for pouring out the water. I cannot remember whether it's 2 times or even 3 times. And then you finish it. Now this is all to prepare a weed.
Yeah.
And then you finish it by putting it in an iron skillet with some bacon grease, cooking it, and I'm not making this up, until it is black. And you can put a little onion, and my mother puts an egg and scrambles an egg with it. So you kind of get a poor country version of eggs Florentine.
Kind of a frittata.
Yeah, and now
Poke
just
salad frittata.
one egg. She says it helps it. I think they put the egg in there to disguise everything else.
This is some plant, Rick.
I don't
you
like
got a plant where the berry is poisonous,
Right.
the roots are poisonous, the stem is poisonous, and the leaves can be made unpoisonous
Right.
if you're really, really careful and patient.
With the skill of a chemist. Yeah, and but here's the thing about poke salad, and this is the reason it's in there. This is the reason that it's in the book. A lot of these recipes, and I beat this particular drum a long time. I believe that my people are the toughest people on the planet. They were, they worked in these mills that would take your fingers, hands, and arms. They dug coal. They worked at U.S. Steel, in the furnaces. They cut down pulpwood and drag the trees down off mountains. These are tough people. The women worked in sweatshops and picked cotton. These are tough people, and often work for little or nothing. And in bad times, and we're funny, we'll cling to our bad times. That becomes a tradition that we are slow to turn loose of, and poke salad is one of those. In bad times, look, if you stole a man's watermelon, or say you stole something from his smokehouse, he would shoot you. But you couldn't go through and strip his corn. He would shoot you. But you could have all the rich man's poke salad you wanted. You could pick it off the sides of state right-of-way. You could pick it out of ditches. It grows particularly well over septic tanks. It grows everywhere. It's distributed through the droppings of birds, so it's a limitless cultivation. And where you can't get other things to grow, poke salad will grow. It was ours. It was our thing. And my mother really believes that it actually has restorative qualities, medicinal qualities.
Be pretty strong to stand it.
Well, she when she was in the hospital, she was in the hospital recently, and she was just griping and grumbling, and just she'd wake up in the morning and put on all her clothes, her going home clothes, and then the doctor would either he'd come by and say, "I'm sorry, we need to run this test, we need to," and so she was ready to go for a week and a half, and finally she just got mad and she said, "I get out of here. I'll pick me some poke salad and I'll cure myself." And she believes that. And so the poke salad recipe had to be in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I want us to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
we'll go out around Canyon Lake and we'll walk on it next to the road and we'll get some.
Right,
And we'll make it.
right, right. Yeah, I'll tell you what, you go ahead and do that.
You have to show me what it is.
Yeah, well, I'll draw you a picture.
No, I want hands-on instruction
right,
here.
Right. Well, it's, as a kid, we understood, because we were taught the way my mother was taught, that you didn't go near the berries. And there were other things that you didn't eat.
Sure.
There are things that you were actually, quite afraid of. But poke salad had to be in there for the same reason that turtle stew, kind of a creekside, riverside turtle stew, had to be in there. Made from one of the big snapping turtles.
Right.
I know now you can get turtle meat. You can actually get it, but a good turtle stew in a spicy tomato broth is one of the great delicacies. I don't like turtle. To me, turtle tastes like lizard. It tastes kind of like an unholy union between a chicken and a Gila monster. But that recipe for turtle stew had to be in there because it was one of the things my grandfather loved at the end of his life. He loved to eat on the riverbank. And that let me tell the story of the famous, and this is where all these stories came from. It was very easy to marry the food to the time because we remember food. We remember feasts in particular. But, there's a recipe for possum. Why is there a recipe for possum? I don't expect anybody on the Upper East Side or in San Francisco or London to go out and procure a possum.
Or Anniston.
Yeah, well, no, you can still get a possum in Anniston, but I don't expect that to happen. But it was, again, it was part of what we ate. Now, other things, the very exotic things, I think are exaggerated in our culture. We didn't eat a lot of raccoon. We ate squirrel, but only for dumplings.
Well, I have myself, I cannot measure things fine enough to distinguish between the possum, which is likely food,
right.
and raccoon, which is not.
Right.
From my point of view, they look amazingly alike, but we are out of time.
Oh, well,
So
it's
we'll all move on, and whatever it is you do next, I'll be looking for it.
Well, thank you, brother.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.